start the same way we did with her. Say your name, your position, and spell your name. All right. Anytime.
I am Judge Anna Huberman. I am the Justice of the Peace of the Country Meadows Justice Court in the Southwest Valley. The Arizona Landlord-Tenant Act is a process-driven system that has specific requirements for eviction process. It is notice-driven, so notices must be given, and once the notices expire, they come to court. So as a judge, my job mainly is to verify that the process has been followed correctly, that the correct notices were given, that the timelines were followed, and that the service in the case has been proper and the documentation is correct. If the tenant does come to court, I would hear defenses, determine if the case must be set for trial, and then hear the trial if there are facts that need to be resolved. Well, obviously the eviction process in itself has not changed because the eviction laws are still in effect. There have been obviously some protections that have been afforded the tenants, whether it be through the governor's office of the state of Arizona, whether it be the National Congress with the CARES Act, and now an executive order from the CDC. All of that has added benefits or certain protections for tenants during this pandemic. But the process in itself hasn't changed. What has changed is the fact that although our courts remain open, our doors have actually closed. So people are not coming into the building. And we have had to create a new way of doing court hearings that keep distancing and the security for the litigants in the courtrooms and the staff. And so we have changed to a virtual format where we do things mostly over the phone. That has been an interesting process. On the one hand, I think it allows for tenants to appear. Things take longer, sometimes it's more complicated, it's hard to not be able to follow some visual cues, people speak over each other. But in general, it has been a good process. You know, once we fixed some of the kinks in it, and it has worked pretty well. My calendar has gone from a half-day calendar to a full-day calendar because things take longer, because we don't want to have people waiting on the phone for hours. So we split up the calendar in a different way, but that has been the major change. Well, what I think has happened is that evictions have been pushed to the forefront. I think that in a court like mine, that we have one of the highest eviction loads in the state of Arizona, evictions have always been on my mind. But now I think that that concern has spread to other areas. It has become a concern not only for all the judges, but I think for people in general. It is something that we've had a lot of coverage. The media has been very interested in it. There's been a lot of coverage. Community groups, citizen groups have been pressuring their local officials to make sure that there have been protections for tenants. So I think that there are some protections right now that have risen from the pandemic, but I think that the biggest benefit for tenants might be that at this point, evictions is foremost in the minds of a lot of people when it hasn't been before. I think that another thing that I think we have learned from this pandemic, the justice courts, we braced from the very beginning for a very high caseload of evictions, yet that did not materialize. We all have, we can speculate as to why that didn't happen, what is going on, but I would suggest that landlords are possibly working with their tenants more than we ever expected would happen. And all I could hope for is that going forward, some of this communication and relationship can carry on even after the governor's order and the CDC order expire. You know, tenants have told me that they think that the law is only geared towards the landlords, that there is no protections for the tenants in the Landlord-Tenant Act. That is not exactly correct. The problem is that the tenants don't know what those protections are, and they definitely don't know how to access them. As I said, evictions are process-driven, and there is a process that they must follow. If they follow the process, they may be able to get some relief for situations that they may be going through that otherwise they are not getting. Tenants just tend to think that the way they can get the attention of a landlord is by not paying their rent, and that will always backfire on the tenant. Arizona specifically does not allow rent strikes, which means that the tenant cannot just stop paying their rent. They do have to follow the process. So I think that the major problem is informational. How do we get that information into the hands of tenants? There are community groups that are working on making getting information into the hands of those who need to have it. I specifically chair a work group for self-represented litigants from the Arizona Supreme Court, and we have created a series of videos that explain in a very simple way with videos and visuals to help people understand what it is they need to do. Obviously, the challenge now is to get that information to the tenants, that they can find that information. That information is on the Supreme Court website at azcourts.gov/eviction or /desalojo, where it can be found in Spanish. Most of the courts in the state have taken that information on their own websites, so you may be able to also follow it or find it on on each county's court's website. So I think one of the things that would help tenants the most is to actually be able to prevent the eviction. Once an eviction has been filed, it is much more difficult to defend, much more difficult to have a successful outcome. And so what the tenant needs to have is information to avoid falling into an eviction situation in the first place. So definitely having that information would make a big difference in the life of the tenant. So one of the things that we have learned from this pandemic is that there are other ways of doing things. Especially in the judicial branch, we rely so much on precedent or how things have always been done, and everyone has been very concerned about going back to normal. And I challenge everyone, to what is normal. Is that what we want to go back to? I think that we have had 6 months plus now of learning to do things in a different way. And a lot of it has just been things that we've had to do because we had no other option. But I think we all should sit down now and have an analysis of what has worked and what has not worked. And that there could be a lot of lessons that we can take from this that we could carry forward. And one of the things that we have learned is that technology can be incorporated into our court system. We do a lot of our correspondence now by email. We have a lot of tenants who don't have access to computers. We tell them to take pictures of documents and send them in by email or to send them by text message. So there are other ways of getting the communication done. And I think it might be worthwhile for the legislature to maybe go back now and look at some of the provisions in the Landlord-Tenant Act and possibly in other legislation as to how some of these ways of communicating might be updated that could be more favorable for all parties. It is hard to see how this changes people's lives, that how it could make such a difference in everything, what happens with the child's schooling, what happens with the tenant's work, all of those things. But during these last 6 months, we've seen this happen to people who maybe it hasn't even been their fault. People who have been victims of economic situation that was not created by them. And so many people have lost their jobs, and so many people find themselves in a really difficult situation. It has been very painful to watch. Right before the pandemic started, I had finished a series of sessions with a physical therapist, and my back and my neck and everything were feeling fine. Within 2 weeks of the pandemic and working with evictions, the stress went right back in, and it has not left me since.
Yeah, it takes its toll.
It does. It's been very difficult.